Hi everyone, and thank you for joining me for another episode here at Blending Graphics. Today's tutorial is going to be something a little bit different in terms of the composition of what I normally make. We're not doing so much of a big storytelling image or anything like that. We're just kind of focusing on just mainly blending one subject into a different background. So if you're someone that likes to do a lot of photography or portraits, then this video is definitely going to be centered around more of that area. Now, that's not to say for anyone that doesn't like to do that this video isn't for you, because that's not the case. We're still going to learn a lot about skin retouching, highlights, shadows, and we're even going to talk about hair retouching as well. I know that's a big topic for a lot of people and something that many have issues with and struggle with, and that was something for me for a very long time. So hopefully this can answer a lot of those questions, and I'll show you my approach to that. So let's just go ahead and get started and jump right to the video. Alright, here we are in the wonderful world of Photoshop, canvas size 5:4 ratio, and here is our main subject. I've already took the time to cut her out of the background, and right now we're just going to scale her down. You can do that by pressing Ctrl or Command T. So we'll bring this down a little bit, and we can turn on our background image. For this one, we're going to do the opposite. We'll size this up to fill up that whole canvas space. For this video itself, we are working with just these two images alone. We're just going to mess with our subject and our background. Right now, I'm just trying to find a nice place for that background. So somewhere right around here should work just fine for what I have in mind. And we're just going to start out doing some modifications with our background. We're going to go up to the top to filter, down to camera raw filter, and we'll just make some additions in here. Starting with some basic stuff with like the lighting. We can turn up our highlights, lower our shadows a little bit. And then we can even come down here, boost up the vibrance, just making small adjustments at the moment right now. We're going to go into our curves, play around with some of the different colors in here as well. We kind of want to warm up our scene just a little bit. So we can even come into this reds, boost up the reds and the shadows just a hair. And then on the blues, we can maybe make some modifications in here as well. So a lot of this sometimes is just about experimenting. That'll be fine for what we have in mind for right now. Let's go down to our color mixer. And essentially what we want to do is go to the Hue tab. And on here, we're going to shift our yellows and greens kind of more towards the warmer side to the left a little bit. That's going to help warm up our picture. So something right around here. All right, that's looking really good. And then we can come over here to the saturation. And some of those reds and orange, we can just make those a bit more pronounced. And this is looking really nice. We'll do some overall color adjustments with the color grading tab. And really, we just kind of experiment, see what we like in this area. But, you know, the overall vision that I have in mind is just to kind of warm up the scene. And last, we'll touch this up with some grain, and then we can go ahead and hit that OK link down below. All right, so this looks nice, and we can even check out the before and after. Okay, and then we can just call this our background layer. What we're going to do is make a copy of this by pressing Ctrl or Command J, turning this into a smart object, and then we can bring back our main subject. So for right now, we're going to go back up to the filter, down to blur, and add some Gaussian blur just to add a little bit of contrast so that our subject is our main focus on here. All right, and then we can even erase some of the spots just on the bottom portion of this picture. And on a new layer on top of that, we're going to add just a little bit of light. So we can switch to a new color, it's a little bit more yellow. That looks good. And we'll just do some little dabs here in that top left corner because that is where our main sunlight is coming from. And then we can do a couple more dabs in that background, and then that should do the trick. So let's just check out the before and after on that. Okay, and then I'm just going to lower that opacity. And then let's add a levels adjustment onto our background layer. We're going to create a bit more contrast so we can boost up the shadows and highlights a little bit on this. Alright, and then we want to follow that up by doing the same thing for our subject. Let's add levels. And clip that below. Same thing, let's just increase the shadows and highlights just a little bit on this so we can have that contrast. And sometimes if you're having issues matching lighting, our subject looks pretty good in terms of lighting. What you can always do is add a black and white adjustment layer, and this can help in terms of lighting. So if you look at the top left corner where our brightest point is, you essentially just want to match that with the brightest point of your subject and vice versa, like with the midtones and shadows. So let's just go ahead and turn this off. That's sometimes a trick I like to use with some of my work, but a lot of times I just pretty much just trust my eye. But looking at that black and white layer, I'm actually going to go back into the levels and just boost up my midtones just a little bit. That looks good. So lighting looks good. We're going to start with our color grading process. We're going to add a curves adjustment on here, clip it to our subject, and we're going to zoom in here first and foremost, and we're going to go to our blues channel just because that's primarily what I see on the tones. We'll decrease that, warm it up a bit, go to our reds and increase the reds, and those two adjustments alone will warm this up. And there's the before and after. Looks great. We'll take it a step further, and we're going to add a color balance adjustment layer, clip it below. Same thing, we're just going to increase the reds and yellows starting with the midtones, and that's going to help warm up our subject. I think for the shadows, I'm actually just going to make those a little bit cooler. And then for the highlights, we'll just increase the yellows and reds once more to make those warm as well. And then we can close that up. Let's check out the before and after. So let's lower the opacity, but overall, we're building a nice foundation for ourselves. We're actually going to add a hue and saturation adjustment layer on top of this because we're going to start playing around with some of the colors specifically on our subject. And the first thing that we're looking at is the sweater that she has on. So I'm just kind of looking to see if we can darken this up a little bit, maybe create a bit more contrast between the clothing and then the background. So somewhere right around here I think is looking pretty good for what I have in mind. Okay, perfect. And then we can zoom in a little bit, and then just like on the skin tones, we can just paint black on that layer mask to bring back that original color. Okay, perfect. So we'll continue on, again, doing a lot of these modifications. But I think before we do that, I want to change up our background a little bit. Let's come down here, and I'm going to just erase what we have painted in there and go back to our Gaussian blur. Let's increase this. And this is going to help us just focus more on our subject, and that's just having that contrast a little bit is going to help us with that. So that looks a lot better. And then I think overall, to help tie in our subject and our background, we're going to add a color lookup table to tie things in a little bit better. We're going to go to the fall colors, and we'll add that on there, and let's lower the opacity a little bit. And like I said, this is just going to help kind of cement our two images together a little bit better. But now we can go back to making those modifications on our subject. We'll add another hue and saturation adjustment layer. And for this one, we're going to focus on the hat. It was a little bit magenta in tone, so right now I'm just kind of sliding around the hue. We'll put it into Colorize actually, and I want more of a brown color instead of more of the purplish tones that we originally had. And I think somewhere right around here is about the look, kind of what we're going for. Let's maybe adjust the saturation a bit on here as well, and even the lighting. Alright, perfect. So let's go ahead and invert that mask by pressing Ctrl or Command I. Using a soft round brush, we'll just paint that back in just on the hat location only. And there we go. We've got that transformation of color. Let's check out the before and after. Yeah, I definitely like that. Alright, so the next thing that I want to target are her nails. And right now, that bright orangish color is not quite working for me. So we're doing the same thing, trying to find the right tones, and you can see I'm just speeding through this because it's the same steps that we've done with the hat. And actually, I'm just trying to find kind of the original color of that hat is what I'm looking for. So we'll just paint it back so that way only the nails are visible. And as I'm doing this, I'm seeing it's not quite the right tone that I want. So we're going to go back into that hue and saturation adjustment layer and just do some more final tweaking just to get that right color. Alright, so just take a couple more seconds. We're just about there. And I think we'll just leave it right here. Alrighty, we're going to go back to our background, and I'm going to add a solid color adjustment layer behind our subject. Forgive me for jumping around. This is just kind of how my brain works right now. We're going to find a nice orangish tone here, and we're going to just look at these different blend modes. I think ultimately we'll go with color dodge. That always tends to look pretty nice. We'll invert that mask by pressing Ctrl or Command I. But let's just go ahead and just do a couple of dabs in the background just to help exaggerate that light and just warm it up a bit. So looking really nice. And we'll lower the opacity on that. Alright, now back to our subject. We're going to add some highlights and shadows onto the skin. This is actually my favorite part. I love doing this. And what we're going to do, we're going to zoom in here. Pressing I for our eyedropper will sample a color. And we can just find a nice highlight to work with. And we're going to have a soft round brush at a very low opacity. But all we're doing here is just exaggerating some of these bright points, like on the nose, the cheek, the top of the forehead and the chin, just some of these different areas. And we're just gonna make those bright points even brighter. It's just as simple as that. And we're kind of going for a little bit more of that glamorous type of feel. I really like that look, so that's just kind of what I'm doing right now. So I'm taking my time with this. Again, the key is just really low opacity as you're doing this and just slowly building up the process. Let's take a look at that before and after. So I really like this. We're going to do the same thing now, but for our shadows. And we're just going to find a different color. So some people like to do levels, curves, exposure, and then invert those masks. The only problem that I have with that sometimes is that a lot of the times with the colors, it actually desaturates them. So this is why a lot of times I just manually paint these colors on the skin itself to either brighten or darken the skin. And I just think it helps make it a bit more cohesive. And you know, as you're doing this, what you want to do, and you just see me do it right there, is you want to change up the colors throughout. You know, don't stick with just one highlight tone or one mid-tone or shadow tone. Use multiple colors because that's what makes it more effective. All right, and then the last thing we're gonna do is let's go ahead and touch up the lips. So we're just gonna find a similar color. And then once we found this color here, we just want to paint over the lips a little bit because we just want to make them pop just a little bit more and honestly just be able to read a lot better from further away. And so right now we're just going through these different blend modes to see what looks good. And I actually really like that color burn initially, so I think we're going to go back to that one. And with this, we'll just touch it up just a bit more around the lips area. And then once we've done that, of course, we have to have that highlight. And you can already see that little light point on the lip right there. So we're just going to exaggerate that even more, again, just to make it easier to read from further away. And this is looking quite nice. We're going to zoom out here a bit, and then we can actually highlight all four of these. If you just click the top one, hold down the shift key, click the bottom one, press Command G to group them together, and then let's take a look at the before and after with all of those modifications. But overall, I'm really happy with this. You know, for your personal projects, you want to spend more time on this. For the video here, I'm just kind of going through it pretty quickly. I've added a copy of our subject because what we're going to do here, I want to make sure I have a backup. But we're going to convert this new one to a smart object. And on here, we're going to bring back some of that blur. So go down and add some Gaussian blur. Somewhere right around here, the 2 pixels looks good. And we're going to invert the mask by pressing Controller Command I. And just along the shoulder area and just on the sides, there was some original blur on that original image. So that's kind of what we're doing. We're bringing that back and make sure that the sides are just not very, very clean. This looks just a bit more natural. Okay, so I'm pretty much just wrapping up here. I think this is looking really nice. And what we're going to transition to is we just touched up the highlights and shadows on the face, and now we're going to do that same technique on her sweater. So like I said, we're doing the same technique. We're going to find a nice lighter color to use, and this is going to be for the highlights. All right, so right here, I think will work just fine. Let's hit OK. And then we're just going to exaggerate some of these brighter points. I actually don't have this in any sort of blend modes, and I don't plan on using any blend modes for this. What I'm actually going to do is, once we're finished up here, is we're just going to use the blend if sliders to help preserve some of that texture of this sweater. Alright, so just a couple more areas on the left side to touch up. Okay, and then let's double click on that layer at the very bottom here. Let's go ahead and make sure we can see our subject. But you want to Alt Option click on this slider, and we'll separate that so that way we can bring some of those darker points back in. And let's see that before and after. And we can even zoom out a little bit so we can see more. Alright, let's do the same thing for the shadows this time. I've already found the color that I'm using for this. But we're going to do the same thing like we did for the highlights. We're just going to go over some of those darker portions of the sweater, maybe at the creases or where parts of the arm are touching the body here. And even right by the neckline. And then so for our blend if, we're actually going to do the opposite. This time we're going to go to the bottom right portion, break up these anchors, and then slide this to the left to bring back some of the brighter spots. All right, and then let's go ahead and lower down that opacity on there. All right, let's take our next step, and we're going to start working with the rim light here. And on a new layer, clipping it below, we're going to find a very bright, light yellow tone to use. Let's zoom in here at 100% opacity and using a very soft round brush. We just want to go around to different parts of the body to exaggerate some of the light that's just going to be touching the side here and the edges. Now, what you don't want to do is just make an entire rim light glow around the entire edge of the body, because that just looks very fake. So make sure that you pick and choose where you're adding this on there. Obviously, you want to highlight the spots that are more susceptible to the light interaction with the sun. And my word of advice is less is more. Don't overdo it, because again, that's another way that it starts looking a little fake. So here we are with just minor and subtle adjustments. So I think what we're going to do is take this a step further and just add a bit more light interaction with the sweater. We're going to add a solid color adjustment. Find a nice saturated orange to use. We'll clip it below and we'll just go through these different blend modes to see what we like in terms of blending and the lighting. Maybe this one. No, let's go ahead and just change this. I think we're going to go back to that linear dodge. I think that looks really good for this. And then once we have that selected, let's invert that mask, Command or Control I, and we're making sure that's below our rim light that we just had. And we're going to just warm up some different parts of the sweater. So, I mean, basically what we're doing here is just adding a variety of tones onto the sweater. It goes back to what we were doing on the face. You want to pick different colors for the highlights, the midtones, the shadows. That's all we're doing with the sweater. Adding different blend modes here, and that just helps create more variety and just a better quality finish. Alright, so that's looking really good. And then in fact, what we're going to do here on top of this, we can touch up some areas of the hair, even the hat. We can add a little bit of that light. And see the before and after. Great adjustments. And what we're going to do now that I'm kind of looking at this is let's add a new layer beneath our subject. And we're just going to warm up some glowing light right behind our subject, right by the face area. Anything that kind of helps tunnel our vision to the face, I think that's kind of the focus that we're going for. So that's what we're highlighting here. All right, so that's taken care of. We're going to go back to our skin highlights. I realized that we forgot to do the fingers, so I want to make sure that we touch those up now that I remember. And just like the skin, we're just going to exaggerate some of those brighter spots on the fingers here. It's just going to help in terms of contrast and makes it pop and more effective looking at the picture from a little bit further away. Okay, so our right hand's looking good. The left hand will just touch this up area now. Okay, and then that should pretty much do it. Let's zoom out here. Okay, let's push forward to another one of my favorite parts that I like to work on, and that's the hair. Now, I don't actually have any hair brushes for this. I'm just using a general Photoshop brush tip that we're going to use, just a hard round brush. Let's zoom in here, and I'm going to start with a dark portion of the hair. I always like to start with the darkest and build my way up. And we're going to zoom in even closer. But I'm just working off of a trackpad on a laptop. Now, if you have like a pen tablet, you can mess around with the brush settings. That can definitely help. But for what I'm doing right now is I'm just following the shape of the hair that we currently have on our subject, adding more strands of hair. And like I said, I like to work with the darker tones first. I usually work with about 5 or 6 different colors, working my way up to the brightest points at the end. But you just want to follow the contour and the shape of the hair currently, just add on to that. It is quite a process. What I just did, if you press R, you can rotate this and make it something a bit more comfortable for you in terms of how you draw. All right, so that's our first layer, and then we can add a brighter one. We'll add a new layer on top, and we can just find a different tone to use. So let's sample something right here. Change that just a bit. And then we can start our next process. And we'll just go over this. But yeah, I mean, this is pretty much how you do it. This is how I do it. I'm going to take some time to work on this, but I'm going to speed through this so you can at least see my process. I'll see you at the finish line. Okay, everyone, here we are at the end. And let's go ahead and group all of this together. And then let's check out the before and after of what we just did here. So here's our before, and that's what we've added on. A lot of nice adjustments. Now, you can see on the left side, I started to use more of the very light yellows and even white tones because that's where the most intense light is coming from the sun. So just bear that in mind whenever you're working with hair. Pay attention to where your lighting sources are coming from. All right, so let's make a copy of this solid color adjustment layer. And we're actually going to add on to the leaves here. So we're just going to paint white on parts of this and just kind of exaggerate some of those tones as well. All right, let's actually clip that to see what that looks like. Nope, let's not do that. Let's undo that, move that to the top. And we want to control a command click on our subject to create a selection. And then we can kind of come back here, do some more final touches on this. So I'll just take another second and we'll add this on there and then we'll move on. Okay, let's check out this before and after. And let's go back in here. I'm just going to make some little adjustments right here on the leaf on this side. But that should do it. And I like to zoom in and out sometimes just to kind of get a better feel for how it looks overall. We're going to add a new layer on top and just kind of on the sides here, we're going to find a nice light color to use. But I just want to add just a pop of glow right above the shoulders here. And what this is going to give us is just kind of a nice little angelic halo effect. Again, it just kind of helps us with our focus on the face. Let's add another layer on top of our hair. And we're just going to focus on the right side because I just want to make the hair just a little bit brighter in spots. And we're using an overlay blend mode to do this. I like the lighting of the hair on the left side, but the right side, we're just touching up a bit more. Okay, so I think that looks a lot better than what it was. Alright, so I'm actually going to go back to another layer beneath our subject, and I want to soften up some of this background just a little bit more. So let's just go ahead and do a couple of dabs just right behind here. And like I said, we just want to soften it up from the sunlight. But that's pretty much going to do it. I think what we can do now is go up to the very top, add a new layer, and if you're on a Mac, just press Command-Shift-Option-E. And if you're on a PC, Control-Shift-Alt-E, and then that way we can merge these together, convert it to a smart object, go to our Camera Raw filter, and here we're going to do some final adjustments. We'll start with the basics, and we'll do a little bit with the lighting. Now we've already done a lot with the background Camera Raw, so just making minor stuff. I'm turning down those highlights just so we can bring back more definition from our sky, and then we can darken up our shadows a bit. the whites we can actually increase just a little bit on there too. But like I said, we don't want to overdo it too much because we already did a lot with the background. So we're just making some final tweaks here. Alright, next we can come down to the details and we can increase the sharpening. And if you hold down the Alt or Option key while clicking the masking slider, move that to the right, you can see the area that's white is what's going to get affected. So a nice little tip there. So that looks nice. We can continue moving down here. And we'll do some final adjustments here with the color grading. So I think for the shadows, we'll just kind of add a little bit more blues and purples on here. And then I think for the highlights, we'll just make those a bit more warm, maybe a little bit green as well. Alright, so that looks good. And we can hit OK. And let's check out the before and after. That's the before. Here's our after. And on top of that, let's add a color lookup table. We're going to slide all the way down and pick late sunset. And let's close this and let's decrease the opacity on here. This is just going to take our picture and just help darken it up a little bit so it's not overly bright like what it was before. And we can paint black on the layer mask just right by the face just a little bit so we can bring some of that brightness back. Let's actually add another layer on top. We're going to do some final adjustments here. Let's brighten up some of that spot there. Make it brighter where the sun is. Alright, so that looks really good. And then we can even kind of add a little bit more of a glow and light by the shoulders. So let's change up this color a little bit on here. And we'll just do a couple of dabs right by the side. Brighten that area up. But ladies and gentlemen, this is going to do it for the tutorial. I hope you like this. As mentioned before, this is something different than what I've done in the past. So if you like to have more tutorials like this where we're pretty much just working with a subject and a background and polishing that up to make it look really nice and cohesive, just let me know down there in that comment section. And as always, if you do like the channel and you like the material that's being discussed here and the tutorials, make sure to like, subscribe, and share the videos. That is the greatest way to share your support for this channel and to help this channel grow so that way it can do more in the future. So please be sure to tune in next week as we have another video here at Blended Graphics. In the meantime, please be safe and take care. I will see you all soon. Have a good one.